Unsettled Matters is essentially divided into two equal parts. The first half is his life, is Bruce Lee's life, and the second half addresses his death. In the second half, I wrote two chapters that I felt were probable causes of what had caused his brain edema. One of them was chapter 18, The Devil's Due, and the second one, chapter 19, is Foul Play. I'll talk a little bit about the second chapter, Foul Play. I think a whole book could be written on foul play. I mean, there are just so many there's so many elements and so many people involved and so much money involved and such. It's probably worth an entire book. Someone will do it. I won't. I've already done 3 books, and I've got other projects I want to do. But shortly after Bruce died, the Hong Kong police hit the streets, and they opened a file and labeled it that it was a probable murder. And they had reason to be concerned. Not only did they know about Bruce's collapse on May the 10th, it was a repeat of July the 20th, but they also were interested in Betty Ting, who 2 weeks earlier had landed in a hospital with a suicide attempt that was caused by Bruce saying that he wanted to end the affair. And that was of concern because she knew a lot of triads. She had connection to the triads as well as drugs. The police were also concerned that they knew that the triads had been hounding Bruce for a matter of months. They were also concerned about Bruce's elusive butler, Wu Nagan, who had somehow ended up owning all of Bruce's possessions, including his home. And that seemed certainly motive enough for somebody to be a probable suspect in his demise. Then there were these martial arts elders that they heard about that Bruce had offended, both in the United States and in Hong Kong. There was discussions about some Chinese, particularly the older Chinese, weren't happy about Bruce. They felt was exploiting gung fu on worldwide theater screens. There was also the fact that Bruce had beaten up a triad on the set of Enter the Dragon, and I had heard and read that Bruce had paid off the kid's family. He had also gone after Lo Wei on several occasions at Golden Harvest Studio and threatened to kill him with a knife. And Lo Wei was an officer in a very powerful triad. There was also the matter of Linda had made a comment to the press before leaving Hong Kong that she held no group or no individual responsible for Bruce's death. And this was before the autopsy came out. And they felt that was a little premature. And so they had a whole lot of things that they were concerned about, and they went banging on doors. And they interviewed a lot of people. And when I was in Hong Kong, I interviewed a lot of people. And I interviewed some people who were connected with the Hong Kong police. And so that was the first problem, was that the police had viewed this as a probable murder. There was also the matter of Raymond Chow. And Raymond was a powerful man in Hong Kong. I mean, he was the head of Golden Harvest Studios. He had a lot of money, he had a lot of connections. He drove a Rolls Royce. The police were less inclined to go harass him, at least not initially. But there was a lot of concern about Raymond. The first being that it was well known that Bruce and Raymond had had a real falling out, that there had been trouble from the beginning of Enter the Dragon. Actually, from dating back to 1971 when Bruce first came over to make his initial 3 films with Raymond. Raymond began talking to the press and telling them that Bruce didn't know anything about the film industry, and Raymond was essentially taking credit for Bruce's success. At even one time, I think, called Bruce stupid. I mean, this didn't sit well with Bruce, and no one can blame him for that. But the two had falling out, and there have been public statements that Bruce frequently cussed out Raymond on the set and F-bombed him, and he made no secret that he didn't get along with him at all. The other problem too was that Raymond controlled all the purse strings. When Bruce died, and I've mentioned this on other videos, Bruce had nothing in writing. Linda had nothing in writing. She had no contracts at all. All she had was what Bruce had told her was his oral agreements with Raymond. And of course now with Bruce no longer living, without any signed written contracts, and of course, Raymond is a Hong Kong citizen and Linda isn't, that's a pretty unbalanced battle, isn't it? Raymond just stands there and says, I don't know what you're talking about. I got Bruce a Mercedes. I gave him the money. I gave him cash. I gave him, he's been paid. I don't, what? Show me these contracts. Raymond stood to earn a lot of money on Enter the Dragon with no contract with Bruce. The other thing is that it was very clear that Bruce was returning later to the United States, but initially there was talk about him going into business with Run Run Shaw and the Shaw Brothers Studios, which absolutely dwarfed Golden Harvest. Run Run Shaw, I think his worth at that time was $400 million. He had homes on all continents. Bruce now had his own film company, Concord, and Bruce wanted to go into double harness with Run Run and Warner Brothers. Same deal that he had with Golden Harvest, only this time he's just going to replace Golden Harvest with the Shaw Brothers. And the Shaw Brothers had a massive distribution throughout Asia and the Pacific Rim, and Bruce thought that it would be a much better marriage with Run Run than it would be with Golden Harvest. And of course, Run Run had offered Bruce the salary of $400,000 for the lead role, and I don't know what percentage of the box office. But today that money is $2.5 million. Compare that to what Raymond Chow had paid Bruce for those first 3 films, which was $25,000. That's quite a difference. And right before Bruce died, he had gone over to Shaw Brothers and posed with wardrobe fittings for this movie they were talking about, and that was well known to Raymond Chow. And during the shooting of Enter the Dragon, Run Run had actually planted spies on the set, and reports coming back to him was that they didn't think the film would get finished because of Bruce's, and Raymond constantly at odds. And Bruce was at odds with everybody. I mean, he was at odds with Paul Heller and Robert Klaus, and a day didn't go by that there wasn't a major falling out somewhere. And Run Run felt that the film wasn't going to get completed. Also, Bruce decided that he was going to return to the United States without Raymond. And of course, without Bruce was Raymond's Golden Harvest's, big cash cow. I mean, without Bruce, Golden Harvest had nothing. And there are all these deals later on, when Enter the Dragon was shooting, nobody was really certain how this film would do. They were watching dailies, and it looked like, Bruce had some great scenes. Surprisingly enough, how much time Bruce is on film in his fight scenes? 11 minutes. This is close to a 2-hour movie, I think. What made that film, it wasn't the script, it wasn't the acting, it wasn't anything. It was 11 minutes of Bruce Lee's fight scenes. That man cannot be replaced. And when you lose Bruce Lee, you don't have anything left. And because of his screen presence and his fight, he was being offered. At some point, they ran Enter the Dragon in front of test audiences. And that's a fairly good barometer of how this film is going to do, and the needle was off the charts, literally. And they knew they had a hit. So before Enter the Dragon even came out, Bruce was getting offers from all over. I mean, these were big offers as well, which leads me to be highly suspect of Raymond Chow saying that on the night that Bruce died that he was over at Bruce's, at Betty's, discussing the script Game of Death, discussing the cast and whether Betty would be in the picture. She didn't have to discuss anything with Raymond. If Bruce wanted Betty in the picture, she's in. That's it. There's no discussion. It's Bruce's company, Concord and Golden Harvest, and Bruce doesn't need Golden Harvest at this point. And as far as rewriting the script, since when does Chow become Bruce Lee's writing partner? Bruce didn't have any writing partners. This was Bruce's script, and he's not bringing Raymond in as a writing partner. And the two had this huge falling out, and it was also reported that shortly before that, a couple days before that, that Bruce had either pushed or punched Raymond Chow over a sofa. So I can't imagine that Raymond is over at Betty's sitting around with Bruce talking about Game of Death, their next picture. That just didn't happen. I didn't buy that at all. I'm sure the police didn't either at some point. Interesting that after Bruce died, Raymond started coming out with a lot of statements. First, the headlines he gave to the South China Post was that Bruce Lee was a very sick man. Those are the headlines. Bruce Lee was a very sick man. And he claimed that Bruce had been kicked in the head several times during Enter the Dragon. I don't remember any scenes when anybody was even kicking at his head. And there's no reports of him going to a hospital or being down or that would have been all over the place. I remember him being kicked in the head. Well, that's what Raymond Chow said. And he said that after he collapsed on May the 10th and went to Baptist Hospital and came to the U.S., that whole incident was kept secret. It wasn't kept secret at all. Everybody knew about it. There wasn't a secret. All the people at Baptist knew about it. Linda knew about it. The people on the set in Golden Harvest and the editing, they knew about it. I heard about it over here in the United States. So for Chow to come out and make the statement that it was a highly kept secret that Bruce had collapsed is highly suspect. Why he was laying all that out, I don't know. I have my suspicions, but all these statements he was making to the press on a regular basis didn't make a lot of sense to me. I also didn't find out until recently that prior to Raymond buying the studios that became Golden Harvest, that he actually worked for Taiwan's equivalent to the CIA. I didn't know that. I just recently read that somewhere. It's the National Security Bureau, which to me means that he knows how to cover his tracks. If he's working for someone like the CIA. So I think the police knew all about that. They weren't going to show up at Golden Harvest or Chow's house and say, I want you to come down to the police station. But I'm sure that he was on their list as somebody who stood to gain a tremendous amount of money had Bruce Lee died. And lastly, it's true that Raymond Chow is the only person who was present on May the 10th when Bruce collapsed and at Betty Ting's the afternoon and the evening when Bruce died. Betty was not at Golden Harvest, but Chow was. And Chow was at Betty's. He's the only person who was in both places. And so that was another person of interest that the police had on their list, and probably another dozen. It's been noted by many people who were around Bruce in the last couple of months of his life that he had become very concerned about his personal safety. When I talked to Jim Coburn when he returned from Hong Kong, he was one of the last persons to be around Bruce of our immediate friends. Jim told me that Bruce wasn't the same person, that he was stressed out. He was very worried about, he seemed extremely paranoid about everybody, those around him and his surroundings. And he said there was a heaviness sort of looming over Bruce. When Bruce was at his high school, he went to his high school with, of all people, Bobby Baker, who he introduced as his bodyguard. I have no idea why. Someone slammed a door hard. I guess it sounded like a gunshot, and Bruce dove under a table. I guess he thought somebody was taking a shot at him. That's a strange reaction. It was around that time, too, that he began carrying his silver-plated, pearl-handle Derringer which held two hollow point .22 bullets. He also had a .44 Magnum firearm. Both of those firearms, by the way, were highly illegal in Hong Kong, and had Bruce been caught with them, he would have found himself in serious trouble. It's possible that his paranoia could have been caused to one degree or another by the drugs he was taking. It was well known if you smoke the wrong kind of grass, you can drop into paranoia. LSD will certainly cause tremendous paranoia, sometimes what they call a bad trip. Cocaine is a similar deal. So it's possible that some of his paranoia was caused by his drugs, but many people felt it was more than that, that he was very worried for his personal safety. Over the years, there's been a lot of discussion about the triads involved in Hong Kong film industry, Bruce's life, and perhaps his death. I have my own understanding of that. I think that the triads sometimes, there are people who want to equate the triads to the Italian mafia. They want to view the triads as an extremely violent group of gangsters that are lethal and ruthless if you don't do what they say. That's a real stretch. The triads, as I understood them, and as I understand them today, are most of the people who are triads in Hong Kong, and have been for decades, even back to their fathers and grandfathers, are hardworking people. They're businessmen. The belonging to a triad is beneficial to you if you want to do business in Hong Kong, in China, and elsewhere. Many of these triads have an element that they are a fraternal organization, much like our Moose Lodge, our Elks Clubs are in this country. They're also much like unions are here in this country, the Teamsters and the Longshoremen. If you want to get a lot of work and a lot of benefits and be represented well as a driver or a longshoreman, you join the union. They're going to look after you. They're going to make sure that you get your health care and your life insurance and a good salary, and that you're represented. In many cases, this is what the triad does, especially in the Hong Kong film industry. If you want to work in the Hong Kong film industry, it's very wise for you to join a triad. Many do. Many producers, directors, people who work in the industry belong to triads, and it doesn't make them criminals. They're just, I kind of looked at it in Bruce's case as having a Hollywood agent. It's very, very difficult to work in Hollywood if you don't have an agent, or at least an entertainment lawyer. To just go out on your own, you're not even going to get an interview. But if you're represented by a triad and you want to work in Hong Kong film industry, it's almost necessary that you belong to a triad. Lo Wei belonged to a triad. I understand, it's my understanding, that Raymond Chow belonged to a triad. Didn't make them criminals. It just is the way that business was done. Much the way it's done in this country, only they're called from different names. That's not to say that there is not a enforcer element in the triads. The same way there's well known that the Teamsters and the Longshoremen have an element of enforcers. Doesn't mean they're criminals, it's just as, they do have their own muscle. So that's going into that. When I was researching this too, I did a major study of the triad. This is a government release that I got from Washington, D.C. It was the hearings before the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations of the Committee on Governmental Affairs, United States Senate 102nd Congress. And this dealt specifically with Asian organized crime. And I got very involved with these people. I did call the offices. I talked to several of the people, several of the government and the politicians who were involved with this study. And I read both of these releases, which were quite extensive. Many of these are name people, they name places, they name events, they have charts of who belongs to triads and what triad they belong to. Here's an example. I don't know if you can see this, but these were very, very informative to me, and plus the phone calls and the meetings that I had with people that were involved with this. And this was in 1991, in late October 3rd, 1991, when those were issued. So I did a massive study of the triads. Now that's not to say that in the Hong Kong film industry, if you belong to a triad, they get a percentage of your earnings. And I believe that Bruce ran into a problem when he went to Hong Kong and agreed to give the triad a percentage of his earnings, whether or not he was a member or not. He agreed to a percentage, much the way he would give a percentage to an agent, to a Hollywood agent. And as long as he was in Hong Kong, apparently there was no problem. But suddenly when the discussion came up that he was going to be leaving and going to the United States, or that he was going to be in business with Run Run and he was possibly coming to the United States with Warner Brothers or whatever he had in mind, he wasn't going to stay in Hong Kong. He was coming to the U.S. He wanted to be a movie star in the United States. He wanted to be like Tom Cruise or Steve McQueen. It's a better example. I think what happened with him was that the triad said, well, wait a minute. Our contract with you extends wherever you go for the rest of your life. And Bruce, knowing him, he would have said, no, it doesn't. It extends while I'm making films here in Hong Kong. That's what we agreed to. Ask Raymond. And they would have said, no, you wouldn't be where you are today to go back to the United States and make all these big movies with them had it not been for us promoting you in Hong Kong, and therefore we own you. And you going to the United States, but we're coming with you and we're going to continue our management of you and take our percentage. And I don't think Bruce would have stood for that for 2 seconds. And I think that he tested the waters when he made Way of the Dragon. I think what he did was he said, okay, I'm going to see how this is going to play out. I'm not going to make a film in Hong Kong. I'm going to Italy. I'm going to Rome. I'm going to make Way of the Dragon. I'm leaving Hong Kong. So I'm not in your jurisdiction at all. I'm going to hire Italians. I'm going to make the whole thing on location throughout Europe. Whatever I want to do, it's not in Hong Kong. And it doesn't involve you, just to see what they would do if he did that. I think that's a fairly good assumption that that's what he was doing. Otherwise, why leave Hong Kong? Why leave all the Hong Kong business? I think it was a test to see what they would do. So I think that the triads, I think that certainly there was millions of dollars at stake here. We're talking a tremendous amount of money had Bruce become the star that he certainly had the potential to become with a worldwide distribution and the deals that would have been made. There was a lot of money involved, certainly far more money than Raymond Chow ever imagined. And that was a lot on the line. And I just can't imagine the triads, as I understand them, saying, well, fine, it's been nice. Certainly enjoyed having you here and enjoyed getting to know you, and we'll certainly watch your pictures when they come here, and good luck to you, Bruce. I don't think that happened at all. How it played out, I don't know. But I'm certain that it concerned the police. And by the way, the Hong Kong police was infiltrated with triads. That was well known. There were triads in the Hong Kong police. In considering poison of Bruce, I had to go back and look at what had occurred on May the 10th when Bruce was taken to Baptist Hospital. And it was clear that the doctors at Baptist assumed that he probably had been poisoned, either accidentally or on purpose. Because whenever you have a patient that's coming in with a possible renal failure and brain edema, those are earmark signs of someone who's been poisoned. And when Dr. Langford examined Bruce and ordered mannitol, mannitol isn't necessarily used only for edema. It's primarily used for flushing out barbiturates, an overdose of barbiturates, but also for flushing out a system that has a lethal dose of sodium. and sodium is found in most poisons when examining a patient's kidneys. And Bruce was suspected of having kidney failure. So mannitol, the fact that they ordered mannitol was a real red flag. The excess sodium is a buildup which produces that edema of the brain and the convulsions, and this is why they had ordered the mannitol. It would also explain when Dr. Cartman ran some tests on Bruce and looked at the tests that had occurred at Baptist. He was very alarmed at a BUN test, BUN test, which is a blood urea nitrogen test, which was just off the charts. The reading that was listed at Baptist, either Baptist or St. Teresa, I'm not sure where that test was run, was 92. And Dr. Cartman felt that was a typo. He thought that was probably supposed to be 9.2. To have that degree of blood urea nitrogen, that level of blood would be astronomical, and it indicates kidney failure is what it indicates. When urea builds up in the body, it's a byproduct of the digestion of protein. It's a byproduct of the breakdown of protein. And there are two ways that this happens. One is from food. If you have a heavy protein diet, if you're eating a lot of creatine is an example of a protein supplement that people were using back then, where it was like eating raw meat. And a lot of protein drinks and a lot of meat and such, eggs there. You could have a high BUN test, but not 92. That would be, that's off the charts. But the other way that you get a high BUN test is when not only does your blood show urea in the blood that is the product of protein that you're eating, it's also the product of the breakdown of your own muscle tissue. And it was clear that because of whatever Bruce was suffering from, his body was wasting away. When he died, he was around 120 pounds. I mean, my wife weighs 120 pounds. I shouldn't say that. I hope she didn't hear me. I can't imagine when I stand next to my wife that Bruce is actually that size. I mean, my wife is kind of a petite woman. So his body was wasting away, and I think that was part of it too. But you also find these high levels in someone who has been poisoned over a period of time, and that concerned Dr. Cartman. He, as I say, he thought originally it was a typo, but after Bruce's death, when he was called, for deposition, he changed his mind about that. He said that he felt that he now understood what that high level of urea was in his blood. It's been asked whether at autopsy whether the doctors looked for poisons, and they did. Worldwide, there are slightly over 9 million poisons, chemicals that are deemed to be poisonous, and of these, 3,000 of them are responsible for 95% of both the deliberate and accidental poisonings reported each year. The common procedure for looking for poison is to look for trace metals, is to run a test for trace metals, because the majority of poisons contain one or more trace metals. Dr. Lamb did test for mercury and lead, which are the two main trace metals found in most poisons. He didn't find either. The two elements that he did not run for were phosphorus and fluoride. Those are two poisons that they're known to cause convulsions, cerebral edema, and renal failure, or kidney failure. And both fluoride and phosphorus are found in common household pesticides. He didn't run tests for either one of those. It's true that prior to Bruce's death, about 2 months prior to Bruce's death, he was very, very paranoid about what he was drinking. he was watching, no, he would carry a thermos around with him. There are pictures of him on Enter the Dragon with his thermos, and he watched over that thermos like a hawk. In fact, Anna Capri at one point reported that there was a stuntman that was around Bruce's flask, and Bruce was so alarmed and paranoid about the whole thing that he had the kid fired. So he was very worried about what he was eating and drinking, although it was reported that near the end of his life he wasn't eating anything. Not only had he lost his appetite, but he was sticking to mainly fluids. Linda said carrot and apple juice is what I read somewhere, but that he wasn't eating food really. He was just mainly drinking fluids. Unfortunately, the fact is that if Bruce died of poisoning, it was unquestionably a premeditated act. And more than likely, if a poison was used, it would have been a poison that would not have shown up at autopsy, at least not a standard autopsy. And if it was said that if someone were in need of a unique poison, that Hong Kong would surely be the place to go looking. I covered this in my novel T-Money. I've got a main character in there in the novel, in the book, that primarily is a master herbologist who is making these undetectable poisons. But Grandmaster Ed Parker said it right. I'll read this so I don't get it wrong. Kempo Grandmaster Ed Parker must have known this when shortly after Bruce's death he was quoted as saying, "Many of us do not know the inner thinking and secrets of Chinese herbalists. They have herbs for medicine, and they have ones we've never heard of for poison. I believe it was foul play that killed Bruce Lee." And finally, there has been considerable questions raised about the autopsy photographs and Bruce's how he appeared in his open coffin. I've seen the autopsy photos, and I agree with several of the comments that have been made. One of them is that Bruce had bruises on his face which were consistent with someone who had been attacked. Clearly when somebody, it was said, and I don't know if this was mentioned as an explanation for this, but I know that Raymond Chow said that when he went over to Betty Ting's and tried to awaken Bruce, that he slapped him in the face a lot, tried to wake him up. And it was said that Dr. Cho, I think that was either Raymond's or Betty's personal doctor, did the same thing, slapped Bruce around a lot trying to wake him. So if that was raised by either one of us, what are all these bruises all over Bruce's face? That probably is what they would have said. Well, we've slapped him a lot. But there was concern about all these markings that were all over Bruce's like he had been attacked. And it seemed to me when I saw it, there was more than just a slap. His forehead appeared to be branded by an iron, which was then used to singe his left eyebrow. It was very strange. You could see it from a certain angle that his left eyebrow appears to have been singed. The left side of his neck was very swollen. And it looked like it had been a target of real intent. I mean, there was a swelling on the left side of his neck. The side that was just, you could clearly see, you can even see it in the one autopsy photo that they show in various magazines. I won't show it on this video, but if you look for an autopsy, it's on YouTube. Look at the left side of his neck. The bottom of his neck, most of all, the bottom of his neck, way down near the bottom of his neck, looked like that had been slashed or pierced. And it had kind of a scary discoloration. And in the coffin photos, it almost looks like they're covering that whole area of his neck. And it's sort of done in a very weird way. In conclusion, when I wrote this book 25 years ago, and it came down to the chapters 18 and 19 as to the cause of Bruce's death, whether it was from cortisone abuse or whether there was foul play involved, I was 50-50. People would ask me, well, which one do you take? You've written these two theories. Which one do you favor? And I said, I really don't have about 50-50. I could argue either one of them. I'm about 50-50. That's no longer the case. The last 25 years, with other things that I've learned and things that have come up, I now believe that what had happened, I do honestly weigh heavily towards foul play. I believe that Bruce was poisoned, that some antigen was introduced into his food or his drink, and that that whatever it was not going to be found at autopsy, and also whatever it was going to, the cause of death was going to be adrenal failure. And when people like Dr. Hunter and other medical professionals looked at the autopsy and looked at the medical and the lab reports and everything, they concluded that the adrenal failure was caused by cortisone. Bruce's overuse of cortisone. It happened to be that he was using cortisone. But there is some indication that cortisone may not have been what caused his adrenal failure. That it could have been, it's not 100%. But I do think that it's very possible that there are a number of poisons that we know about that cause convulsions, brain edema, and adrenal failure, and probably a whole number of them we don't know about. And when I look at the whole scope of Bruce's life and the number of people that he had angry at him, and the amount of money that was involved, and some of the people that he had crossed and was willing to go to battle over millions of dollars, I'm leaning towards, these days, I'm leaning towards that there was foul play involved, tragically.
Thank you.